Hi guys, and welcome to another Inktober video. This is my day 4 illustration and the second one here on YouTube. I have mentioned this before, but I'm putting almost all the other ones over on my Patreon. So if you'd like more video content from this Inktober, then make sure to check that out. Any tier or wherever you're at on Patreon, as long as you're a patron, you will be getting these videos. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk a bit about this. So, like I have mentioned, I had all of the sketches figured out beforehand. I have the placement of everything, of where they'll be in the book, so I have a flow for how it goes, which is really helpful because it helps me to make sure that there is enough variety of the types of illustrations that I want and that they're placed correctly and everything. So this one is the first portrait illustration that I have in the book, and I actually only have a handful of them. I'm really focusing a lot on the environment and full body characters interacting with the environment. So it was kind of a treat to put in a few portraits that are just focusing on the face into the plans for Inktober. So it was fun to be able to pick this one up and work on it for today. Working on basically just one large head with a little bit of the stuff in the background. It seems like it'll be more simple, but in a lot of ways it is more complex because I can paint a tree in a lot of different ways, but if you mess up a face, it's pretty apparent. So while this one had a little bit less line work, I think, that went into it than some of the more visually complex pieces, it did still end up taking, I think, about the same amount of time as all the other ones up to this point. I just realized that I was taking a little bit more thought in between each section that I was working on, and I was making sure that I was going nice and slow for the facial features when I was both inking them and doing the ink wash later on. But yeah, it was nice to have a kind of a different pace to it because it was this different subject matter, and it forced me to work in a little bit of a different way. It broke up the monotony a little bit, where I could just focus on different types of things and different types of shadow shapes that I was trying to achieve. So I think this is actually, it is the first piece so far that I did without doing a value study beforehand, just a little thumbnail where I could figure out the placement of all the values, and I really should have done that. It's easy for me to forget when it's something more simple like this, and by simple I just mean that there's less distinct objects or sections that needs its own distinct value and everything. So I just kind of didn't think about it. It wasn't an intentional choice, but I should have. I found that while I was working on it, I just didn't really pay as much attention to making sure that things had as much contrast. So at the end, I feel like there's a lot more closeness of all the values overall, and just some very specific places that have stronger values to them, more darker darks and lighter lights. So that, I think, was definitely a reminder that that's a very important step for me to make sure that I'm happy with the end result and that I'm getting something that has the impact that I do want. Luckily, I think that this one ended up pretty all right. I think it helped that it was, like I said, a little bit more simple, so I could stand up with that a little bit more. But moving forward, I will definitely remember that so that I can be sure that I'm doing what I need to make sure that I'm sure of what I'm doing, and I can have that little key right next to me as I'm working and make sure that I'm getting things dark enough, because I notice that is something that I naturally, as I'm working on it, tend to lean on the lighter side. And I think a very large part of that is that the inks dry significantly lighter than they look when they're wet, which is a bit different than watercolors. Actually, watercolors are a little bit like that, but not nearly as much as the inks that I'm using. So yeah, I think I just need to have that value key that I can use and make sure that I'm matching the dried washes and not just the wet ones. This is actually the second piece that I've done a similar technique for the background, where I did the lightest wash over the entirety of the background, and then I would add the darker values layered on top of it. And that actually is a technique in watercolors, but I tend to like to do a very strange sandwiching kind of effect where I'll do like the the middle tones, and then I'll do a glaze where it's the lighter value, and I put it over all of it, and then I add the darks back in, and it's just, it is kind of a strange approach. So this one, I've been trying to do it a little bit more like a traditional watercolor approach, and it's really fun, actually. I learned a lot from it as far as layering the values and giving depth to certain areas. And it also allows me to really just keep working at getting the dark values dark enough. Like I said, with this specific piece, I feel like I didn't really push the darks dark enough, but with the one before this one, which if you want to check that out, it'll be on my Patreon very soon. But I was able to build up the darks over time, where it was a lot easier to be able to see that and then add more layers and create a more complex looking effect that way. And I'm really actually very excited. I think I mentioned this a little bit in the last video, but I feel like I have much more control over the ink washes this time around. And I think that there's this key thing that I figured out, but I also wonder if it might be the ink as well. I'm using just regular India ink that once it's dry, it's supposed to be water resistant, but last year I think I used a more aggressively waterproof kind of an ink. I'm not sure. And that may not play any effect at all, but I have found that this year I've been going in with much juicier washes than last year, where I would go in with a lot of the ink wash, and that actually completely cured the issue that I had last year where it would just texturize immediately. And it's a really pretty looking effect, so I just kind of leaned into it and let it happen and didn't really fight it and just let it be part of the character of the pieces. But it's very nice to get a handle on it and to know how to make sure that it's not happening. So when I want it to happen, it's very intentional, and when I don't want it to happen, I can also control that. So yes, that was my really big takeaway, is that I need to use a lot more of the wash itself than I have in the past. That's actually something that I will definitely be doing some tests with my watercolors after all of this Inktober is over, because I for the most part can control it and get pretty smooth washes on hot press. And if you don't know, hot press paper is a little bit more tricky to get these really smooth washes as opposed to cold press. So I wonder if I'm still like not using quite enough water with my washes, and it just doesn't affect it as much as it does with the inks. So the inks, I'm thinking that it pushed me even more towards that, and with the watercolors, hopefully that's something that might just give it a lot, or give me, I should say, a lot more control over the medium. So yeah, I'll definitely do some tests and see if that really does make a difference. And if it does, then that would be very exciting. Oh, and I will go ahead and talk about this now, but I didn't actually get it recorded. So after the fact, after looking at this piece for a little while, I decided to change what is happening with her eyes. So I think at this angle, it doesn't look as bad, but I gave her like normal eyes with the iris and pupils and everything. And the intention was that her expression in her face was supposed to be awestruck. In the companion piece that'll be on the opposite side of the page is something that'll support that a little bit more. But in the end, the positioning of her iris and her eyes themselves, they just kind of ended up making the expression feel really vacant. And I don't think that this is like the cure for it, but I think that it helps more. And what I ended up doing is I decided to fill in her eyes with a very dark wash and then add these little stars that would mimic the stars in the background. And this is something that I actually really like, and for once I feel like it does take the piece a little bit closer to what I would have liked it to be. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, when I try to make fixes like that, it's usually just hoping that it'll make it okay, and it's not better than what I wanted. But in this case, I am much happier with it. You'll see what it looks like at the very end. And I know that this is this is a change that not everyone will like, but I definitely felt like it was something that I wanted in this piece. It also adds a lot more contrast to her face, which is deeply needed. But that's it for today. Like I said, I do have lots of other videos that will be up soon on my Patreon. I also have all of the first 4 pieces that I've done so far up on my shop now under one listing, so I will have a link to that down in the description that'll take you over there if you're interested in owning any of the originals so far. But that is it for today, so thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be back next Wednesday with another Inktober video, so I'll see you guys then.